Hello again, I'm super pumped for this lecture because in this conversation we are going to be adding text so that when we hit play, that text is fed in from our script and it is put within our game. So this is going to be fantastic. We're programmatically adding text into our game. So let's jump in and get started. Now we want a script where we can put our game logic that says what's the information, what's the text that should be displayed when the player is playing our game. And when we create a script, all scripts need to be attached to a game object. They need to be a component of a game object. So what we'll do starting off here is jump over into our hierarchy and right click. And as I've said before, you can go up to game object and get the same menu. I prefer to right click and create empty. That means empty game object. And you'll see here it's called game object. At the moment, there's nothing in this game object except for its transform information. This transform here is a component. We'll be talking about components a bit more in a moment. The transform component has values on it. It has values for position, rotation, and scale, and we worked through a little bit of that in some previous lectures. Let's rename our game object to game. Now we could call it game logic or game flow or game structure. Any of those names would work. Because we've only got this one thing in this very simple game, we'll just call it game so we know where all of our game information is going to be placed. Now you can see on our game object we have one component. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Now I've created a little analogy here where I'm looking at a sound stereo system. This is our home stereo system, and we've got a couple of speakers and a television. What we're looking at here are the equivalent of game objects. So the TV is a game object and its function is to display the visual information. So it's our visual display. We've got our speakers and that's about audio output. And then we've got our stereo system sitting on our shelf here. Our shelf has some compartments, and on each compartment we have what we could consider components. And the components could be a radio tuner, a Blu-ray player, you might have Google Home you've set up on there, a DVD player, a record player, maybe you're old school. Most people don't have many of these things nowadays. A radio tuner, what's that? A record player, who uses those? But this is an example of all the things that you might have on your home stereo system sitting on your shelving unit here. These are components of your stereo system. And if we were to dig into that a little bit deeper, each component, for example, our Blu-ray player, has properties. And properties in Unity can be one of two things. They can be values or references. So an example of a value might be, over on our amplifier, we might have the volume currently set to 8, for example. That's a value. We might have a value that we're playing on our DVD player, we're playing track 3. That's the song we're playing. And references are things that we're grabbing from somewhere else. So what is the disc that we put in our Blu-ray player? Maybe we're looking at the latest Avengers movie and we've put that into the Blu-ray player. That's a reference. So the reference is the Blu-ray player disc that we put into our Blu-ray player. So this is saying that game objects, such as our stereo shelving unit here, consists of components, such as our Blu-ray player, and our components are made up of properties, and the properties can be either values or they can be references. Let's have a look at that back in Unity to get some context for what we're talking about here. So we have game, we've currently got one component, transform, and we've got values under our position. And so every game object has a transform because we need to know where in the world it will be placed. So everything starts with a transform, and it's good practice to, when we first create an empty game object, is to reset the position back to 0. We can do this a couple of ways. We can type 0 into the X, Y, Z coordinates, and that will make it to the 0 position, or we could right-click on transform and click reset, or there's a little cog over here on the right and click reset. It's not going to have an impact at the moment because we're not trying to visualize this particular game object. We're going to use it to run our code, but it's just standard practice that we reset our empty game objects. So they're sitting at the 0, 0, 0, so we know where to find them if we do need to find them. Okay, so that's the component and they're the values. We're going to add a new component. We do that by clicking the Add Component button, and you can see all the various components we have available to us here. If you click on some of these, here are some Physics 2D components. Here are some audio components, such as the audio listener. Here are some effects, such as a particle system. So these are components that we can put on our game object. What we will do is scroll all the way down and click on New Script. We're going to create a new script. Another way to create a script by adding a component is if we type into the search bar up here the name of our script. So we are going to name our script in this instance adventure game, capital A, capital G with no spaces. That's a convention for a new class. It starts with a capital and has capital on any other words and no spaces. And then click New Script, Create and Add. You can see after we do that, down in our Assets directory, we now have a new script with Adventure Game is the name of that script. If you click on it, you can see adventuregame.cs down the bottom of your Unity engine down there. adventuregame.cs. Now let's double click on adventuregame.cs to open up Visual Studio. Might take a minute. I'll expand mine a little bit so you can see what's going on. As we get more content on our scripts, I'll probably zoom out a little bit, but for now I'll zoom in so you can see things nice and clear on your screen. You can see we have public class adventure game. Now in our default script, the first thing I want to do is to create a variable, and I'm going to make this an instance variable or a member variable that's available to our whole class here. So underneath public class adventure game, give ourselves a couple of lines. On line 7, I will type text, because it'll be of type text. So what type of variable is it? It's not an int, it's not a float, it's not a string, it's a text variable. And the text variable, undo that, the text variable will be called text, so small t. All our variables start with a small letter, and then any new words, we do a capital letter. So text component is what we'll call this, and then semicolon. And you can see that there's red squiggly line underneath text. The error we're getting is the type or namespace name text could not be found. What this means is text is a very specific piece of information. It's a specific keyword that Unity knows. However, it doesn't know where we're getting it from, and we need to use a particular namespace. So we need to tell Unity, this is coming from such and such a namespace. So up at the top here, underneath using Unity Engine, we'll type using Unity Engine.ui, semicolon. And that now says we will use the Unity Engine user interface namespace, and all of the information that's contained within there we now want to have access to in our class. And for now, don't worry about exactly what is a namespace and what is inside a namespace. Just know that we need to use a particular namespace in order to access the aspects of that namespace. For example, text is a user interface keyword, and we need to be using Unity Engine.ui in order for us to have access to this particular keyword here. Okay, so now we have our variable of type text, and it is called text component. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to add a new thing here that we haven't seen before. At the start of our line, I'll give myself a space and then go back to the start so that we can auto-complete this. If you open up square brackets and type in serialize field, and then close square brackets. And for those of you English Australians out there, Canadians, you can see that we have Z, so we're using the North American way of spelling this, just a little bit of a gotcha that you need to make sure you have a Z or a Z and not an S. So we have serialized field. What does that mean? Well, by putting this in front of our variable, and we can put serialized field in front of any of our variables, it means we now have this available within our inspector so that we can make changes in the inspector. What do we mean by that? Let's save our script back over into Unity, click on Game. This is our game object we created. And you can see we have our adventure game script, and there now is a field down here called text component. So the variable we've just created, text component, is now sitting here as a reference. It's saying, what would you like text component to be? This is where we can hook things up visually and say, well, we want text component to be this particular game object or this particular element. There's two ways to assign to this field in here. One is to drag. We could go over into our canvas, which is over on our left in our hierarchy. We could find the particular thing we're interested in. In this instance, we're interested in story text because we want to dynamically update all of our story text, and we could drag that over into the field. That's what I tend to do usually, but for now, let's do it the more careful way, which is to click on the little selector to the right of our text component here. Click on that selector, and then select from our appropriate game objects what we would like to put in there. And you can see it's only giving us the two things that Unity knows are text fields, that are a text of type text. Our story text and our title text are type text, because in our script we said it must be of type text. Nothing else will do. I will not let you put anything else in this variable. I will not let you assign a light or a camera or a enemy. It has to be text. That's what it means when we do type. So we've selected story text in here. So we clicked on here, double click on story text. We now have story text as our text component. Very cool. The next step, back over into our script, we need to do something with this text component. And in our start method, we'll type this line, text component, and that's our variable. We're accessing this variable. We're saying it's about this particular variable we've just created, dot, and we'll type in here text. Now, what does that mean? I'm just going to put an equals here, so it's sitting in the next state ready to go. Text component dot text. If we go back to our component over here, we can see this is saying text component is this story text. Okay, let's go look at story text. Story text has its own components. It has a rect transform, it has a canvas renderer, and it has a text component. So here's our text component. There's even a little T that sits next to it here. Text component, we've got all this placeholder nonsense that we've put in here for now in our text component, but this is of type text. And then the field here is the text field. So this is the text component, and then this is the text field within the text. So it's a little bit confusing because it's text, then text, and we're putting text into text, which is into text. So a little bit confusing, but it's super important that we get these concepts now when the words are the same so that you can see these are actually different things. So this is the text component, and this is the text property or text field or text values that we have within our text component here. So in our script, what we're saying is I would like you to access text component, and then within text component, that's why we have the dot here. It's saying underneath or within or belonging to. We're going to talk about the dot a lot throughout this course. So for now, it's just a really gentle introduction to this dot operator in here. But we're saying the text component, within the text component, we are referring to or accessing the text property. That's what we're saying with this statement here. And that needs to equal something. Well, what do we want it to equal? We want it to equal whatever our game should be saying at this point in time. Not placeholder story text over and over. We want it to say something. So for now, we're going to put in just another piece of placeholder, but it'll be placeholder that we've driven through our code. So this is the challenge that I have for you, is to add this text programmatically from within our script, finish the statement by assigning a string to our text reference. So if you have a look at it, we need to assign a string to this text reference here. And if that makes sense to you, you're like, yep, that's cool, Rick, good to go, I know what to do there. Or you want to figure it out, then pause the video and jump in now. I'll give you a hint if you're scratching your head, but I want you to have a chance to jump in and take that on right now. So pause the video if you're good to go. Otherwise, here is your hint. Your hint is, I'm a string. This is how we write a string. So that's your challenge. Assign a string and save your script, hit play, and see what happens in your game. And I'll be back here with my solution in just a moment. Right, so this is a pretty simple one in terms of it only requires us adding a tiny bit. What we're doing is assigning a string by having our open brackets and then our quotation marks and saying, I am added programmatically, or whatever you want to. You can say, hello world, or this is Rick, or the world is fantastic. Whatever you want, or something that's more themed to your game. So steampunk forever, FTW. Okay, so I've added text component.text equals I am added programmatically. Save that back over into Unity. If I click play now, it takes a moment to load for loading our scripts, understanding what's going on. Clicking play, I am added programmatically. So we've added that from our script. So this is the foundation for us being able to add our own text and variety of text into our game window here, so it can update dynamically. When we push a button, some other piece of text can appear, and when we make a decision, some other text can appear. So this is the foundation for it, of having our text component.text equals something. We've added that into our game. We've created our game object. On our game object, we have a script component, and in our script component, we have our story text as our text component. So great work in this video. You're doing really well, and I will see you in the next lecture.